on the pasuk Vayovo Yaakov Sholem Ir Shechem. Yaakov came complete, intact to the city of Shechem. Chazal tell us in the Gemara. Rashi brings it also in his Pirush al Torah that Sholem, complete, means Sholem Begufi, was complete in his body. Sholem B'mamoyne, was complete in his money, financially. Sholem B'teirasi, was complete in his Torah. What does it mean, Sholem Begufay, complete in his body, and Sholem, complete in his money? So the Medrash explains, because since the pasuk says V'hutzei al Yerechoi, that initially Yaakov was limping because of his story and his encounter with the Malach, and that's why it has to say Sholem Begufay, that he was complete in his body. So he was healed from that. Sholem B'mamayni, he was complete with his money, even though the Medrash says that Yaakov was honoring Esav for 9 years with the gift that the Torah describes that he was giving Esav. This went on for 9 years. He kept on sending him gifts. Nevertheless, he was not lacking anything now. By the time he comes to Shechem, he's not lacking anything of his money. So that's in the Medrash. Similarly, in Rashi al Torah, Rashi tells us Sholem Begufay, that he was cured from his limp. Sholem B'mamoynoi, that he was not missing anything because of all the gift that he had sent to Esav. But regarding Sholem B'teirasi, complete in his Torah, the Medrash does not tell us what that means. Now in Rashi, we seem to find a contradiction. In Rashi's explanation in the Gemara, he says that he did not forget his learning, Mipnei Torah Chaderech, because of the bothers, because of the hardships of the road, of the way. But in his Pirush al Torah, he says that he did not forget his learning, Bebeis Lavan, in the house of Lavan. So we need to understand what's the reason for the difference between these two Pirushim, whether it's because of the journey, the hardship of the journey, or is it because of his stay in Lavan's house. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, it would seem to be that the opposite logic should be true, meaning to say, in his Pirush al Torah, where Rashi tries to explain everything according to Pshutei Shel Mikra, it would seemingly fit more to say specifically that which he says in the Gemara, that he didn't forget his learning because of the troubles of the way, and not to say what he does say in Chumash, that he didn't forget it in the house of Lavan. Why is that? Because the pasuk says, "Vayavo Yaakov Sholem Ir Shechem." Yaakov came complete; he came intact to the city of Shechem. According to Pshutei Shel Mikra, it seems like this is some chidush that's being said, because that's now what's happening with Yaakov's arriving in Shechem. There's a chidush that he now came intact, which, as the Rebbe is soon going to explain, that's going to fit more, that it's related to the journey that he just went on. Now, in the Medrash, the Medrash says that Yaakov, when we speak about the fact that he was cured from his limp, this is something that actually happened quite a while back. It happened immediately, right after the story with the Malach. The pasuk says, "Vayizrach lo Hashemesh," the sun was shining for him. So immediately Yaakov was cured. So too, when it comes to, in regards to the gift that he sent to Esav, again the Medrash says that Hashem had filled what was lacking by Yaakov. He returned it to him immediately. So according to the Medrash, this idea of Yaakov being complete in his body and financially happened way before coming to Shechem. It was actually when he arrived to Sukkot, which is more than 18 months before coming to Shechem. But that's according to the Medrash. But according to Derech HaPshat, these things, that Yaakov got cured from his limp and that he was replenished financially, this didn't happen immediately. Rather, al Derech HaPshat, this all sort of happened more in a natural way. Both the cure from his limp as well as regaining his money. And therefore, when the pasuk says now, "Vayavo Yaakov Sholem Ir Shechem," it sounds like the pasuk is saying is that now, finally, when he comes to Shechem, he has everything complete. In other words, that's what the pasuk is saying. That's the chiddush of the pasuk. That now he's complete. Because it's only then that he actually has perfectly everything. First of all, cured physically in his body from his limp. And it's at this point that finally he has all of his money back. That's because all of his sheep kept on reproducing, they were being fruitful, multiplying, etc. So now he once again has everything back from the gift that he gave to Esav. So now let's apply this back to the learning. If we say that he didn't forget his learning as a result, in other words, he may have forgotten his learning because of the bothers of the way, and that's what we're saying. No, he came complete with his learning, so it makes sense that he's saying that now, as he's coming to Shechem, where he's now coming from the journey, he's settling now in Shechem, as the pasuk says, Vayika and Chelek Hasodi, he's buying a portion of a field, etc. So now the pasuk is saying that he's complete with his Torah, despite the road, the journey that he had just taken, coming to Shechem. But according to the Pirush that the Rashi brings in Chumash, that he didn't forget his learning in the house of Lavan, so then seemingly this idea that he's complete in his Torah has nothing to do with his coming to Shechem. This shleimus, this perfection that he had already quite a while back. This is right when he leaves Lavan's house, we should be saying that. So why is Rashi, in his Pirush ala Torah, Pshuta Shal Mikra, mentioning this idea that he didn't forget his learning in the house of Lavan? It seemingly would have been more fitting to say that he didn't forget his learning despite the journey he just took. Now, the truth of the matter, says the Rebbe, it's not actually a problem in saying that Yaakov didn't forget his learning in the house of Lavan, even though the pasuk is saying Vayova Yaakov Shalom now by Irsh when he's coming to Shechem, because that we would be able to answer simply, because the pasuk just says that he came complete. It doesn't say he came complete with his Torah. It just says simply complete, and therefore we could say the pasuk means that now when he comes to Shechem, he's complete in every area, in all three things, physically, financially, and with his Torah. But it's true, in his Torah by itself, he was actually complete before. So that wouldn't have been such a problem. The question, however, is, since we have another choice, we have another way of learning, so why aren't we learning that way? Since we can learn that Shalom B'Teirase means, with Yaakov's journey, his trip now, coming to Shechem, so why would Rashi connect it in his Pirush ala Torah and Pshuta Shal Mikra? Why would he connect it back to the time when he was in the house of Lavan, when seemingly it would be simpler to say that it's referring to the journey that he just took? The Rebbe says we also need to understand. The Medrash actually brings a fourth thing, which Yaakov was complete in. Shalom Bevanav, complete with his children. What does this mean? The Medrash explains. Since it says that Yaakov was worried that if Esav might come and strike down one of his camps, and then he will have the other camp left, etc. In other words, Yaakov was concerned what's going to happen with his family. So now we're saying that no, he came Shalom Bevanav, he's complete with his whole family, with all of his children. So the question is, seemingly this idea that he's complete with his family and his children, that's something that would be fitting and understood also in Derech HaPshat, not only in a Medrash, the way of Drash. So why is Rashi in his Pirush ala Torah, why does he not quote this idea? He quotes the Gemara, which has the other three things. Why doesn't he quote this fourth idea, which the Medrash brings, that he's complete with his children? The question is even more. In the beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha, the Torah relates how Hashem promises Avram, I'm going to make you into a great nation. Rashi himself explains over there that Avram is now going on a journey. So it says Rashi, because going on a journey causes three things. It reduces, it causes a lessening in reproduction and financially, and also in one's name and one's reputation. That's why Avram needs to have these three brachos where Hashem is promising him now for children and the other things. So what do we see? That a bracha in connection to children is something, a very major thing, which we're trying to ensure that there's no problem with that. In other words, it could be a situation of diminishing because of the road. And Hashem needs to say, no, that's not going to happen. So why is it then that in our pasuk, Vayova Yaakov Shalom, which is again, Yaakov had gone on a way, on a journey. He's asking Hashem for a bracha. He asked Hashem for a bracha for this. So seemingly it would have made perfectly sense over here for Rashi to say that he should come complete also with his children. So why is Rashi not explaining it this way? In order to understand all of this, says that Rebbe, we're first going to have a look at a more general question which we have with our Rashi. And that is, when one learns the pasuk Vayavo Yaakov Shalom Ir Shechem, Yaakov came intact, complete, to the city of Shechem. After the whole lengthy story of how Yaakov was saved first from Lavan and then from Esav, it seemingly would have made perfect sense to say that the main idea of Vayavo Yaakov, that Yaakov came complete now, simply is referring to the fact that he came unharmed from Lavan and Esav. The truth of the matter is Rashi himself says it in the further Rashi. On the words Bevoye mi Padan Aram, when he came from Padan Aram, Rashi says it's like a person saying to his friend about someone that this individual had just come out from the teeth of the lions, came out intact. So too, Vayave Shalom mi Padan Aram, the Yaakov came intact from Padan Aram, from Lavan and Esav, who he had trouble with along the way. So that seemingly would have made the most perfect sense for Rashi to tell us over here, Vayave Yaakov Shalom Ershchem, simply means he came unharmed from Lavan and Esav. And yet Rashi in Pshutei Shel Mikra is telling us Vayave Yaakov Shalom is not referring to the fact that he was saved from a direct danger of Lavan and Esav, but rather this sort of general type of shleimus, wholesomeness, that he comes intact in the case of his body, financially, his Torah. Why is Rashi explaining it this way? Furthermore, where's Rashi even getting it from? In other words, in Pshutei Shel Mikra, where's it coming from? And within this, says the Rebbe, the question is that Shalom Begufo was saying, complete, if we are already speaking about the fact that he's wholesome in his body, and yet we're saying, we're not speaking about the fact that he was saved from a danger, from Esav and Lavan, but rather that he was cured from his limp. Now, the Rebbe is preempting something that we possibly could say. The Rebbe says we cannot say that what's forcing us to say this is the word shalem, that he's coming complete and intact, which seems to be implying that before there was something lacking, something missing, and only something missing, in other words, not something major, and this chisaron, this shortcoming was now completed. Says the Rebbe, because in addition to the fact that in Rashi himself afterwards says clearly this idea of shalom in connection to being saved from the teeth of the lions as quoted before, but furthermore from this Rashi itself, we could see that that's not the case. Because Rashi says shalom b'Torah, complete in his Torah, sheloi shochach, that he did not forget his learning. What do we see from here? That even though practically there was nothing lacking, nothing missing, and yet you could use the word shalom even though there was nothing missing, just because of the possibility that something could have gone wrong. And therefore, seemingly, we could have said the same thing in regards to the fact that he was saved from Esav and Lavan. So why is Rashi explaining it in regards to these other things, rather than directly being saved from Esav and Lavan? Says the Rebbe, the explanation is, we could explain it in the following way. As soon as Yaakov heads out to Choron, Hashem gives him a promise. V'hine anoichi imoch, I'm going to be with you. I will ushmarticha, I'm going to guard you. I'm going to protect you wherever you go. Which in Pshutei Shel Mikra, first and foremost, is referring to the fact that Hashem is going to protect him from Esav and Lavan, as Rashi himself explains. This is because Yaakov was afraid of Esav and Lavan. That's why Hashem is giving him these promises. And therefore, the pasuk does not have to emphasize that Hashem's promise was fulfilled and that Yaakov came complete, intact from Esav and Lavan, because this is self-evident. It's obvious. Of course Hashem's promise was kept. Similar to Avraham, which we spoke about before, that Hashem gave him the promise by saying, Lech Lecha, that I'm going to make you into a great nation, and that the troubles of the journey are not going to reduce into three things mentioned before. So Hashem gives him this promise, and we don't find later that the pasuk should come along and emphasize that that's what happened, by using a similar expression to ours, saying something like Vayavoy Avram Shalom, that Avram came intact, or anything like that. So the question then becomes, why is the pasuk saying this by Yaakov? This is why Rashi tells us, why Rashi is learning that we're not speaking about the type of wholesomeness or coming intact, which would have been obvious anyways, because that's what Hashem promised him. Rather, we're speaking about things that were not included in Hashem's promise, when Hashem said that I'm going to be with you and guard over you. But rather, we're speaking about specific things that could have caused that Yaakov wouldn't have come complete, despite Hashem's promise, as we'll soon see, and nevertheless, by Yova Yaakov Shalom, and nevertheless, Yaakov did come complete. And from the fact that the pasuk just says Shalom, just plain Shalom, So that tells us that we're not speaking about something just in one specific detail, but rather it means shalom as the literal meaning of the word. It means shalom in every single aspect of his. And these are the three areas that Rashi enumerates. Shalom begufe, complete in his body, that he was healed from his limp. And why is this not included in what Hashem's promised? The fact that Yaakov was limping was a result of his battle with the Malach of Esav. So a Malach, as we know, is a shliach from Hashem, a messenger of Hashem. Now, since this is being done to Yaakov, for whatever reason, is being done by a Malach of Hashem, so clearly this is not included in that promise where Hashem is telling Yaakov, I'm going to guard you from Esav and Lavan, because this is clearly some other situation where there's a Malach of Hashem coming over here dealing with Yaakov. So that's why that wouldn't have been included in that. When it says Shalom b'mamayne, that he came complete financially, there was nothing missing from all of the presents that he gave Esav. Why wouldn't this be in contradiction to Hashem's promise? Why do we have to give a special bracha for this? Because even after Yaakov gave Esav this whole huge gift, Yaakov still had tremendous amount of wealth, as understood just from the simple reading of the Psukim. And therefore, even if Yaakov wouldn't have been now reimbursed, replenished for that which was missing because of the gift that he gave, that wouldn't have taken away from the fact that Hashem promised that I'm going to guard you wherever you go and I'm not going to abandon you. Which means, as Yaakov had requested originally, that he should have bread to eat and so on. In other words, Yaakov still has his basic needs plus much more. And yet what we're saying is Hashem had replenished everything that he was missing from all of that gift. And that's what it means. That's the chiddush that we're saying, that he was shalom, that he was complete, also financially. And finally, shalom b'terasi, complete in his Torah, that he didn't forget his learning while he was in Lavan's house. Why would we think that he should have forgotten the learning in Lavan's house? Says the Rebbe, it's not because of Lavan's bad influence on Yaakov, because Yaakov is with Lavan, and that's why there's a concern that he may forget his learning. Because again, that would have been included in the tefillos that Yaakov had and the promises that Hashem made. When Yaakov said V'shavti b'shalom, he's davening to Hashem that he should be able to return in peace. Rashi tells us over there that it means that I should be complete from sin. I shouldn't learn from Lavan's ways. And of course that was fulfilled. As Yaakov himself sends a message to Esav, Im Lavan Arosha Garti, I was living with Lavan and I kept the Taryag mitzvahs. I didn't learn from his bad ways. So we're not talking about that. What is the concern? The concern is because Yaakov was so overly busy and occupied with complete dedication, with complete devotion to his work as a shepherd of sheep, as it should be according to Torah, and as he himself says, B'chol koichi avadati, I put in all of my energy, all of my effort into this work. During the day, I had the heat, and at night the cold, and I didn't sleep. And he worked like that for 20 years. If that's the case, we can understand how this is such a tremendous chidush that despite all of this, he didn't forget his learning in the house of Lavan. Now, once again, this chidush is not connected. This idea is nothing to do with Hashem's promise that I'm going to guard you wherever you go. Because even if Yaakov would be doing this type of work in his own house in the land of Canaan, it would still need a special bracha not to forget his learning. This has nothing to do with his special protection that he needs along the way that Hashem is giving him. And that's the chiddush in our pasuk, that Yaakov comes intact. He comes complete also with his Torah, that he didn't forget his learning in the house of Lavan. Says the Rebbe, this now automatically will remove the other questions that we had on Rashi. We asked, why doesn't Rashi say that he came shalom, complete with his children? Says Rashi can't bring that Esav wasn't able to hurt Yaakov's children. As Yaakov said, if Esav is going to come and attack me, etc. Because again, this is all included in the promise of Hashem, I'm going to guard you. And as we said, the pasuk doesn't have to tell us that Hashem kept his promise. For the same reason, Rashi does not explain in his Pirush ala Torah, Pshuta Shel Mikra, that Shalom b'Teirasi means that he didn't forget his learning because of the journey, because of the bothers of the journey. Because once again, that would have been included in Hashem's promise, where Hashem says, I'm going to guard you b'choil asher teilech, in your journey, wherever you go, that Hashem is going to protect them from any negative impact of his journey, including these things that can happen as a result of the journey, which we just said one of them is the possibility of forgetting learning. As Yaakov David Ushmanani, but Derech Hazasher Ani Hoylech is asking for protection in this journey that he's taking. And again, this is similar to what Hashem promised Avraham Avinu, that his journey is not going to reduce in the various different three things that can end up having an impact on a person. The Rebbe now turns to the Yenishal Torah, to the wine, to the Chassidus that we find in this Rashi. The Rebbe says, we've discussed already other times, that Yaakov's journey to Charon is really a hint. It alludes also to the journey of his children, of Bnei Yisrael in Galus. We know the concept of Maisa Avay Simul Abanim. So the Pasuk says, Vayavo Yaakov Shalim Shechem. Yaakov comes complete in the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, as he comes from Padan Aram. Which also alludes to the idea that Hashem promises every year that he's going to come back complete from Galus. And Rashi explains and adds that the fact that Lavan and Esav on their own cannot hurt a Yid, and that Yaakov is coming complete towards Eretz Yisrael, that's a given, that's an obvious. That's not the Chidush in saying Vayavo Yaakov Shalom. That's obvious. If we have Hashem's promise, so then obviously that's going to come true. For this we have L'chatchila Hashem's promise. Even before we went into Galus, we have this promise that Hashem is saying, I'm with you, I'm going to guard you wherever you go, and then no power, nothing has the power to touch a Yid Chas v'Shalom. So what is the Chidush? That even in these areas, that seemingly, according to the order that was set up L'mayla by Hashem, even in these areas that seemingly there is some room to say that the Galus has some sort of impact to cause some sort of lacking or shortcoming in the Yid. And not only that it could cause it, it even actually causes some sort of chisaron in some of the things, like we found by Yaakov. And yet the pasuk says, "Vayavo Yaakov Shalom," that Yaakov comes intact. That this chisaron, that which is lacking, is not with an emes. In other words, it's not something lasting. It's only something temporary. But ultimately, this chisaron will also be nullified. And Vayavo Yaakov Shalom, Yaakov comes complete, and so too every Yid. And this is expressed in the three things that the Rashi tells us. What are these three things? So number one, Shalom Begufoy, that he comes complete in his body, that he gets healed from his limp. What is this in the context of a Yidden Galus? One of the things that happen, one of the qualities, one of the things that happen in the avoided time of Galus, one of the advantages, one of the things that come out of it, is the avoid of Mesiras Nefesh. And that's why, Rachmana Litzlan, there are all of these suffering in the time of Golus. It's coming as an Isoyan, as a test, as the Pasuk says, Menasa Hashem Elekechem Eschem, Hashem is coming to test you, in order to bring out by the Yid idea of Mesiras Nefesh. And this is the idea what happens by Yaakov, where we say the Malach of Esav comes along, Vayiga B'chaf Yerecha, and he touches him at the joint of his hip, and his thigh. And as the Ramban explains the words of the Medrash on this Pasuk, the Medrash says that this is referring to the malach, so to speak, attacking or touching all of these tzaddikim that are going to be coming from Yaakov, referring to the Doirei Shal Shema, these generations where there was tremendous suffering, and where Yidden were being forced to chas v'shalom convert, etc. They had to have Mesiras Nefesh. So this is a remez, this is a hint of the terrible suffering in the time of Galus, in Rachmana Litzlan, in the harshest, most severe ways. But all of these Yisurim again are to awaken, to arouse by the Yidden this power of Mesiras Nefesh. So Chas v'Shalom, one could think that since these sufferings are coming, not from the Goy, the Esav down here, but it's coming from the Sar of Esav, it's coming from the Malachim, it's coming from above. In other words, it's coming to bring out by Yidden the Koyach of Mesiras Nefesh. So you may think if it's coming from above, maybe there is some sort of real Metzias to it. Maybe Chas v'Shalom is something that could last. There's some sort of real existence to it. And that's why we're saying no. Shalom begufoi, complete in body, being healed from the limp, meaning to say that after we finally do carry out the avodah in Golus, all of these Yisurim become completely nullified, completely cancelled out, healed from the limp in a way that the Yid comes out complete. Because in truth, it was even lechatchila not a real Metzias, it was the whole time just an Isoya, just a test, in order to reveal by the Yid the strength of the Mesiras Nefesh. Number two, Shalom b'mamoneh, complete in his money, that nothing is missing from that whole gift as a result of the gift. And what is this? The whole purpose of Galus, as we know, is not only that the Yid should come out intact, come out complete. but it's also about transforming the things of Golus and taking from his own possessions, from his own money, and transforming it into Kedusha. Similar to what Yaakov wanted, not only, or rather, that it's similar to, just like Yaakov, not only was he saved from Lavan and Esav, but rather he took from Lavan a tremendous amount of things that Lavan himself says, this is all mine. And yet Yaakov takes all of that, transforms all of that. Similarly with Esav, there's a certain transformation that instead of the way Esav was beforehand, that he wants to kill Yaakov, instead he runs to Yaakov, he hugs him, he kisses him. According to the Rashbi, it was b'chol libo, with his whole heart, even though usually we say there's a halakha that Esav hates Yaakov. And yet there's this transformation. In fact, this was a preparation to the time of when Mashiach comes, where he says, which is not only that we're going to judge Esav, but in other words, Esav himself will recognize the kingship of Hashem. Or as the Rambam puts it, that Mashiach is Yisak and Esoilam Kuli will get the whole world to serve the Eibishter together. As the Pasuk says, all the nations together will call out in the name of Hashem. And just like the way Yaakov achieved this was through the gift that he gave, obviously first by davening, and then sending this gift to Esav, so too is by every Yid. That in order to transform all of these things to Kedusha, all the inyanim of the world, the Esav, into Kedusha, especially that of Golus. So again, one needs to, after again, the avoid of Tefillah, of course, first, but he needs to utilize his money, all of his things, as a gift in a certain sense. In other words, he's giving from his own time to plow, to sow, to do work. Now, this is seemingly koiches and time that should have been involved in Limud HaTorah. And yet, what he's doing is he's spending time with the world. In fact, there even becomes the question, as the Gemara says, Torah matehei olel. What's going to happen with Torah if we're involved in all the plowing and sowing and things of the world? But we do this in order to elevate the world, elevate Esav. In other words, one lowers himself down into the world and he gets involved with all the gashmis that you think of the plowing, etc. Or the famous expression that's brought, levushe hamizbar, we have to get involved, engage with that which we're trying to refine and elevate. All in order to elevate the world. So this is similar to this gift in a certain sense. We're giving away from ourselves to be involved with the world. So the question can become, since this avodah is not like the previous avodah which we called a nisoyim, where there's something clearly challenging your Yiddishkeit, and that we say is not a real metzius. The avodah of birurim is seemingly a real metzius. There's a world and we have to elevate it. We have to transform the world. And therefore, there seems to be now, there's going to be a real chisarin, something really lacking in one's money, or in our case, what we mean that is, in other words, in our possessions, in our koiches, in our time, in our efforts, in our energies that we're putting into it, in order to achieve this bitter. In other words, this yerida, this descent of one's koiches, of one's energy and time into the gashmis of the world, chas v'shalom, it seems to be maybe this is a lasting thing. And this is what's being told to us over here as well, that even this chisarin, even this yerida is also only temporary. And ultimately, the Yid remains shalom. He remains shalom complete, even b'mamoinoi. In other words, when we're going to go to the Geula, we're going to take along all of the Gashmis, all of the possessions of the Yid, and in a way that it's all becomes shalom complete with the absolute greatest perfection, all included in Kedusha. And finally says that have a shalom b'teirase, complete in one's Torah, not forgetting the learning while being by Lavan. Says the Rebbe, the idea of learning Torah properly needs one to be separated from the world. Like we find by Yaakov, that he was Yoshev Oihalim, the time he was sitting and learning in yeshiva, he was hiding in the Beis Medrash of Ever for 14 years. So here again, there's a big question. A Yid could argue, since what's being demanded of me is to be involved with this birurim, being involved with elevating, getting involved in the Golus, in the place of Golus, etc., it would seem to be not possible that at the same time he can be able to hold strong to his level of Torah. And this is what we say, that Yaakov doesn't forget his learning in the house of Lavan. And the Rebbe is contrasting this now with the previous two things, because again, by Yaakov, he did have a limp originally, and he did lose some of his money. We just said it was eventually replenished and paid back, or cured. Regarding the learning, we say he never forgot it. The Rebbe is going to compare it now to the Yid. And that is, in regards to the previous two things that we said, the body and the money, and that was again the Mesiras Nefesh that the Yid had, the Tzaras the Yid had, the Yisurim, or investing his time and efforts into the world. Here we say it's possible there was some sort of lacking practically for some time, but eventually he'll be paid back and filled up. But regarding Torah, by Yaakov, it's not even possible there should be anything lacking even to start with. Because as the Pisgum of the Frierdiker Rebbe, only our bodies were given into Golus and to the Shibud Malchi as being enslaved by the governments, but our Neshamois were never chased into Golus. They were never given over to the governments and to the various different kingdoms. And what does that mean? It doesn't only mean simply, in other words, the idea of Golus in the literal sense, that a government, the kingdoms don't have power over the Neshama of a Yid, but it means more than that. That even the Avodah of a Yid, when he's dealing with Golus, even that could not really impact the Pnimius of the Neshama of the Yid. It's always higher than Golus. In other words, even as the Yid lowers himself down into Golus to elevate, to refine the matters of Golus, that's still only the outer parts of the Neshama. But the Neshama itself was never chased in the Golus. There's never possible to be any Yerida in that Chas v'Sholem. And that's what it means. Loishachach Talmudei b'Vayishlach. He doesn't forget his learning in the house of Lavan. The Torah that Yaakov is learning as he was hiding, separated from the world, that always remains intact, even as he is in the house of Lavan in Golus. What happened by the Avis is also a sign and gives us the koyach as well. We have the koyach from Yaakov, that we can be complete as we go out of Golus, not only when we go out of Golus, but even during the Golus itself. As we're in the house of Lavan, there could be this level of Leishachach Talmudai, not forgetting the learning, meaning to say that in the Ruchni is the Kinyan, and we always remain complete. Shalim b'terasei.